I must apologise first for this microphone, which has the effect of making me look either like a bingo caller or a singer in a nightclub. Because I'm old and will die soon, I feel myself able to speak of things which are by general consent absolutely taboo as topics of conversation. I'm especially interested in such subjects, one of which affects at least half of the population one way and another, and yet nobody ever mentions it openly, which is odd. Only a few decades ago, the stepchild was seldom encountered outside the pages of fairy tales such as Cinderella. Now, though, a huge number of families harbour such intruders, and these are a source of frustration and annoyance for all too many parents. Few of us like other people's children, and this becomes especially noticeable when you're stuck with them in your home indefinitely. What makes matters worse is that nobody can actually say out loud what they feel about these cuckoos in the nest. Instead, they must maintain ludicrous fiction that they love these children as much as their own flesh and blood. Few people are deceived by these proclamations of love, but only the most daring of us would risk stating the obvious, which is that our partner's children get on our nerves. Most honest people will readily concede, at least to themselves, that the prospect of raising somebody else's children is an appalling one, which nobody in his or her senses would willingly undertake. The reasons are obvious and include the undeniable fact that other people's children are, in general, immensely unlikable. Strong antipathy towards stepchildren is quite natural, although most of those in the unfortunate position of sharing their homes with them find it expedient to deny publicly that it is so, and indeed warmly to assert the opposite case. That is to say, that their partner's children are lovable and welcome additions to the family. It's not always easy to keep a straight face uh, while giving such solemn assurances. People who know how they feel and accept that they must lie both to their partners and also the world at large in this way are fine. They're psychologically healthy individuals who are truthful to themselves while deceiving others, and they understand how the real world works. The majority of viewers, though, who are or have been stuck with somebody else's kids, will react with wholly synthetic horror and disgust to what I am saying, claiming that they always loved and adored their stepchildren and regarded them in no way differently to their own flesh and blood. It is towards pious hypocrites of this kind that this video is directed, really. A relatively short while ago, a man and woman raising only their own biological offspring was seen as being the natural and desirable state of affairs. Of course, divorce has been around for many years, but what was once known as a broken home was a rarity, traditionally regarded as being little short of a tragedy, especially for the children. We no longer hear of broken homes these days, and it is considered a little indelicate even to think in such terms. After all, many children in the United Kingdom are raised by single parents, and a considerable proportion of the remaining children grow up with adults who are not their biological parents. This is to say nothing of the parents, usually fathers, who have their children at weekends and then inflict them on their new partners. These are all broken homes, although rebranded for the 21st century as blended or reconstituted families. In the United States, fewer than half of all children live in a home with two married heterosexual parents in their first marriage. In Britain, a third of children live in blended families. The accepted modern narrative is that it is no worse for children to be raised by two adults, one of whom is not related to them, than to be brought up by their mothers and fathers. The adults trapped in such family setups have been indoctrinated to accept unquestioningly the absurd myth that the love for somebody else's children is indistinguishable from that which one feels for one's own child. Those buying into this fiction are invariably tormented with guilt and shame for much of the time, because deep inside Unacknowledged consciously, they harbour the uncomfortable truth, which is that they do not love their new partner's children to even the remotest extent that they do their own. Because the model of two parents bonding for life and rearing only their own children is becoming so increasingly uncommon these days, it means that many adults in the Western world suffer from the anguish of imagining themselves to be inhuman wretches who cannot love somebody else's children in the way that everyone else seemingly manages to do. Anything which needlessly creates guilt among a large section of the population is of itself undesirable. In the particular case at which we are looking, a sense of guilt is completely misplaced because all the available evidence points to the conclusion that conflict with, and indeed dislike of, stepchildren is not merely widespread but effectively universal across the entire world. Not only is it common in all human cultures, it is prevalent too in the animal kingdom. Those failing to love their partner's children are not cruel and heartless exceptions, but wholly normal. It is, of course, very right and proper that they should continue to fake affection for the children in the family who are not theirs, but the guilt that they experience about their real feelings is pointless. It should be jettisoned. I'm rather guessing that the expression infanticidal coup is probably one which is unfamiliar to any readers who do not happen to be ethologists. It refers to the practice of male animals and birds taking as a mate a female who already has offspring by another father. From the lions of the Serengeti to the langurs of India, the usual practice under such circumstances remains the same. As soon as a new mate moves in, he kills all the babies by the previous male, thus ensuring that his own seed alone will be passed on to the next generation. The females usually acquiesce in this grisly process. How very different from our own methods, where instead of the unwanted young being disposed of swiftly by biting through their throats, slower and gentler techniques usually accomplish the same purpose. Sometimes, of course, the procedure is every bit as determined and energetic as that which takes place in the lion's den. Step parents are 150 times more likely to kill a baby that is not their own than is a genetic parent. Ridding the home of stepchildren, though, is usually done in a less obvious and more socially acceptable fashion. Stepchildren are many times more likely to die from all causes than children living with both their biological parents. Road accidents, fires, drowning, even illness, the mortality rate for stepchildren is far higher in every case. At first sight, this is puzzling. Surely step-parents are not deliberately burning down their homes just to get rid of an annoying child to whom they are not related. Of course, this is not really what is going on, although such deaths are no less part of an infanticidal coup for all that. Imagine that the house catches fire in the middle of the night. Whom do you rescue first? Your own child or your partner's kid? Almost everybody will first ensure the safety of their own blood, and only when this has been done will an attempt be made to save the life of other people's children. The same applies to crossing the road and being alert to the early signs and symptoms of diseases such as meningitis. Always, parents pay far more attention to the welfare of their own children. This means, in practical terms, that if a couple have a biological child together and another child who is unrelated to one of the parents who lives with the family, then this child will not be as well cared for as the one who is related to both parents. The child whom they have both created will have two anxious parents watching over its welfare and keeping an eye out for potential danger. The stepchild will only have one. It's hardly surprising, therefore, that the chances of this child being neglected, injured, or killed could be so dramatically higher. The exceedingly high rate of sexual abuse to which stepdaughters in particular are subjected can also come as no particular surprise. Incest is surrounded by a strong cultural taboo, which protects most adolescent girls from the unwanted advances of their fathers. No such inhibition operates in the case of stepdaughters, and they are accordingly molested, beaten, and raped at a very much higher rate than their sisters, who are related by blood to the dominant male in the home. When we combine considerations such as those outlined above, and consider too the greatly increased chance of a stepchild being murdered, it's not hard to see why one expert in the field said that having a step parent is the most powerful risk factor for severe child maltreatment yet discovered. This might go some way to explaining another curious fact, which is that stepchildren tend to leave home at a much younger age than children living with both parents. They are, in effect, voting with their feet. They know that at least one of the adults in the home, and quite often too, wish them to make themselves scarce as soon as they're old enough to do so. Perhaps, too, having survived childhood in a hazardous environment, they don't wish to push their luck by lingering after the age of 16 or 17. All of this adds up to one simple and encouraging fact for those who have the misfortune to find themselves burdened and encumbered with children who are not their own. This is that they are not abnormal in nursing the secret hope that something will happen to rid them of a source of constant and unremitting irritation. Almost everybody in their position harbours the same wish, that one day the child whose very sight is odious to them will somehow vanish, leaving them free to enjoy their real family and not be obliged to spend a considerable chunk of their income on somebody they dislike. It is truly extraordinary that although everything which has so far been said about stepchildren and attitudes towards them is widely known by anybody who has taken the time and trouble to look into the matter, it will nevertheless come as a surprise to many viewers, because it's something hardly ever mentioned out loud. Indeed, this is understating the case dramatically. The whole idea of children from blended families being more at risk than those in traditional nuclear families is surrounded by a conspiracy of silence comparable to the Sicilian custom of omerta. Nobody dares speak out loud the stark truth that being a stepchild is the greatest hazard that any young person can face in today's society. I need hardly say that my purpose in outlining the kind of things which are likely to happen to stepchildren is not a way of implicitly condoning them. Rather, it is intended to demonstrate that dislike of and callousness towards children who are not your own, and yet with whom you are compelled to share a home, is very common. This tells us in turn that an awful lot of step-parents who appear to dote on their partner's children are being more than a little ingenuous. A lot of the time they can't stand the children and dream of the day when the child will grow up and move out. For animals, there's another biological imperative at work when they find themselves lumbered with the previous offspring of a new mate, other than the desire to see only their own genetic material passed on to the next generation. There is a question of sharing limited resources. This too is something which human step-parents understand, and adds to the feelings of rage which simmer away and can never be openly expressed, or all too often even privately acknowledged. Most parents, whether they are lions, Hanuman langurs, or suburbanites, are able only to bring home a certain quantity of food and provide living accommodation of a limited size. The more family members who share these resources, the less there will be to go around. Parents might be prepared to go hungry or put up with cramped living conditions for the sake of their own children, but if they're obliged to reduce their standard of living for somebody else's child, this will inevitably generate ill feeling. It's quite understandable, because sometimes it might mean that they cannot lavish all the treats and good things upon their own beloved child. Half of these goodies have to be provided to a child whom they sometimes don't even like. This can be very galling in itself, but the worst part is that not only can you not moan to your partner about it, or even your best friend, most people feel they must also keep it secret from themselves. It's this lack of honesty with ourselves which is responsible for an awful lot of the psychological and psychosomatic disorders which are such a common feature of the modern developed world. It's not difficult to see how this happens, and we must remember that we're not talking now of some very rare and atypical mode of family life, but one which has become exceedingly common, more common, in fact, than the traditional nuclear family. All across Europe and America, countless parents are keeping what they believe to be a shameful secret, one they can never share with their families and friends. Indeed, they usually hide this secret even from themselves, disguising it and justifying their powerful emotions by calling them anything by their real name. It is a terrible burden. It goes without saying that telling your partner how you feel about his or her kid is not going to end well, nor, unless you want to be looked upon as some kind of ogre, should you let your friends know how you feel about the child you've always claimed to love every bit as much as your own. All else apart, it will have the effect of making it look as though you've been behaving like a terrible hypocrite for years. It's one thing to deceive others. Most of us can get away with that for years on end. It's quite another matter, though, to lie to ourselves about the circumstances of our home life, the mental gymnastics necessary to conceal from ourselves how we feel about a family member whom we see every day cannot help but create tension, which can lead to all manner of psychosomatic manifestations. These can range from headaches and panic attacks to chronic fatigue syndrome, I should say. Occasional flashes of lucidity will hardly improve matters because they will result only in crippling guilt as we realize that apparently, unlike all our friends, we loathe the child with whom we are forced to share our homes. I do hope that viewers will realize that although the facts about stepchildren, which I've outlined here, are perfectly true, this video is only meant as a bit of fun. It's not intended to be a serious lecture on family dynamics in modern Britain.